Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center. I'm Jeffrey Ozanga. Coming up on the program, as momentum builds ahead of the August the 1st nationwide protest over economic hardship, federal government to convene an emergency meeting just hours after President Bola Tinubu appeals to organizers to shelve the plan. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar throws weight behind End Bad Governance protest, maintains that the Constitution guarantees freedom of assembly and government should rather protect peaceful protesters. And the federal government slashes allowance of scholars studying abroad, cite economic hardship as reason for its action. We're excited you could join us on your midday gateway to what is going on in the polity, and our job is to tell you exactly what is happening at the moment. We can tell you that an emergency meeting is likely underway today by the federal government in response to a planned nationwide protest slated for August the 1st. This comes after President Bola Tinubu pleaded with the organizers to shelve the protest and give his administration more time to execute people-oriented programs. The Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akume, all ministers, special advisors to the President, Special Advisor to the President on Policy and Coordination, Hadiza Bala Usman, are among those invited for this particular meeting. In a circular signed by the Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Affairs, Mr. Richard Phil-Gangwa, dated July the 23rd, 2024, cites the title as Planned Nationwide Protest. Meanwhile, the Nigeria Governors Forum also expected to meet today, and the new minimum wage, economic hardship, and a nationwide planned protest are just some of the issues that may likely be expected on their agenda of that particular meeting. In the meantime, the Inspector General of Police, Mr. Akayode Egbetokun, is warning organizers of the protest that the police will not condone any form of violent demonstration capable of creating chaos in the country. Addressing strategic police officers at the conference in Abuja, Mr. Egbetokun says the police will not sit idly and allow a repeat of the 2020 NTAS protest, which led to the loss of innocent lives and property. He advised organizers of the protest to shelve the idea, as the federal government is aware of their sufferings and is working towards alleviating the situation.
It is important I address an issue of urgent national importance, which appears to have gained some momentum, particularly on the social media in the past few weeks. Some groups of people, self-appointed crusaders and influencers, have been strategizing and mobilizing potential protesters to unleash terror in the land under the guise of replicating the recent Kenya protest, the Beku. While the force acknowledges the right to peaceful protest as enshrined in our Constitution, we must ensure that these protests do not snowball into violence or disorder. As a nation, we have had more than our fair share of violent protests, which, with rather dastardly consequences. The last NSAS protest led to wanton destruction of public assets, including police stations, courts, transport infrastructure, and loss of several lives. Tales of sorrow, tears, and blood followed what was supposedly intended to be a well-intentioned exercise. Rather than to lead to any positive outcome, NSAS merely aggravated crime rates and insecurity in several parts of the country. Indeed, we are yet to fully recover from the huge economic losses and deep-seated psychological and emotional trauma inflicted upon our people by this protest.
We're not done with the issue of this nationwide protest. Former Governor of Bayelsa State, Senator Seriake Dixon, is urging youths in the Niger Delta to shun the violence in the planned protest, as he believes it will not serve the best interests of the region. Senator Dixon says the youth can express their grievances without violence and destruction of property. In a press release signed by the governor, he says, in his words, the Niger Delta region has suffered years of violence and economic deprivation. Joining such an unwarranted protest will only go further to retard the Niger Delta region. Senator Dixon, who represents Bayelsa West in the Senate, is also asking governors and leaders to engage youth across the country to assuage their anger and frustration, which he said were genuine. In the meantime, former Vice President and presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party in the last election, Atiku Abubakar, maintains that the rights of citizens to protest are enshrined in the Nigerian constitution and affirmed by the court. Speaking via his verified X handle, the former Vice President points out that Section 40 of the 99 Constitution has altered and unequivocally clearly guarantees the right to peaceful protest and assembly and association. Part of Mr. Atiku's statement reads in part, chasing shadows and contriving purported persons behind the planned protest is an exercise in futility when it is obvious that Nigerians, including supporters of the Tinubu administration and the ruling APC, are caught up in the hunger, anger, and hopelessness brought by the incompetence and cluelessness of this government. According to the Vice President or former Vice President, it is deeply ironic that those who now seek to stifle these rights were themselves leading protests in 2012. He adds that a responsible government must ensure a safe and secure environment for citizens to exercise their constitutionally guaranteed rights to peaceful protest. And yet again, that's not all. Human rights lawyer Femi Falana has weighed in on the planned protest scheduled for August the 1st. According to the senior advocate, it is the rights of Nigerians to protest as enshrined in the nation's constitution. He also explains that he won't join the protest because the organizers are not known. He spoke on our political program, Politics Today.
Police Establishment Act of 2020, Section 83, subsection 4, that during protest, the police shall provide adequate security for the protesters. That is the law. So what should be done, or what is expected, if there's going to be a protest and there's an announcement, is to ask the protesters, where do you want to gather, so that the police can surround the place and ensure that hoodlums, so-called, or thugs, normally employed by politicians, deployed by politicians during election, will not take advantage of genuine protests in the country. And I think that is what the government should do now. Try and identify the organizer and collaborate with them to ensure that violence will not occur. How do you identify those who are issuing statements, those who are planning the protest, and then engage with them productively? And then the questions being raised, there are demands that are being made. The government should address this demand. And between now and the 1st of August, it's still a long way.
Well, there's a lot going on in the polity, and everyone seems to be looking in that direction as far as that protest is concerned. But the core of it is a challenge within the Nigerian economy. Now, this was triggered when President Bola Ahmed made those announcements. First, on May 29, 2023, when he assumed office as president, removing fuel subsidy, and then unifying the FX market. Those twin policy, the impact is being felt today, and the economy is having a big hit. The inflation numbers are high, 15% higher in terms of food inflation as against when he came into power, about 10 plus 11% higher in terms of headline inflation as against when he came into power. And today interest rate has actually been increased again by another 50 basis points, further tightening the interest rate, and the local economy is getting a big hit, even if we're getting hot money in return on the other end. So it's sometimes a convoluted issue, but so at the end of it, it's about the economy, which is why we invited an economist to help us break some of these things down today on the program. Kelvin Emmanuel is an economist. He joins us from Abuja studio. Mr. Emmanuel, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon to you.
So there are like 3 issues I want us to touch as quickly as we can. But let's begin from the one that happened just yesterday, where we saw speedy passage of several bills, one of which is the minimum wage, which has now been increased from 30,000 now to 70,000 naira for the least paid worker. And if you do that conversion, that's about $45 in today's dollar term. When you do that, 1,541 naira per dollar at the end of the day. I want your first impression as to how this will affect and impact the economy.
Well, it's a good thing that the president has agreed to increase the minimum wage. However, my concerns, as I've reiterated in the past, is I don't believe there should be a national minimum wage. I believe minimum wage should be negotiated at state level because different states have different capacities to pay, both the state government and the private sector in those states, right? I say that what Zamfara can pay is not what Lagos is able to pay because of the IGR that Lagos State. If you look at the fact IGR ratio in Lagos, for example, it's about 76 to 24%, 76% IGR and about 24% federal allocation. It's not the same reality in other parts of Nigeria. Because when you look at the principles of derivation, landmass, population, derivation, internally generated revenue, IGR, you know, it's that formula, which is the reason why several people have called for fiscal federalism, doesn't really play well into the mechanics of the economy for the different subnationals. You know, so I think the critical issues that needs to be addressed, that the National Assembly needs to pay attention to, is the issues around employee casualization, is the issue around reducing the number of the minimum number that is required for you to qualify to pay minimum wage from 25. I think it should be reduced to 5. I honestly don't think that all states in Nigeria can afford to pay 70,000 naira per month, but also there's a reality that a lot of people don't acknowledge, which is the fact that it's not only government that is supposed to pay minimum wage. As far as you meet up with Section 30.1 of 25 people currently, in your employ, you're obligated to pay minimum wage. So the question is it going to be enforced? Especially, and I'm not even talking about the organized private sector, the Nashima, the NECA, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. I'm talking about the unorganized private sector, the ones who are not in your unionize, who are not in the Penga scene of this world and the likes of them. How are they going to be protected? How is it going to be enforced? The security guard at the estate or the plaza or at the office that is employed by a security company that slashes the salary that is paid to the security company by 50%. You know, how is it going to be protected? The house help or the nanny, how are they going to be protected? These are the people that form the core of the workforce in Nigeria, unfortunately. You know, the federal civil service and the state civil service, I don't think they employ anywhere up to 2 million Nigerians. So the question is, how are the bulk of Nigerians going to be protected with this minimum wage? I think these are the broader conversations that are missed because everyone is so fixed on the amount that the president has declared as the minimum wage, you know. And I think this plays into why the federal government, for example, has decided to, you know, like legislate over a new 50% windfall tax on revaluation gains that the banks made, considering the devaluation of the naira from 750 to the level where it currently is on the forwards that the banks have, the Central Bank of Nigeria. You know, that has brought up some issues around the tax code and the legality of a 50% windfall tax on specific banks that made a massive payday at the end of their 2023-2024 financial year. So, you know, the president has said that the 6.2 trillion naira supplementary bill that is presented to the National Assembly is going to be used to pay the difference in the increase in the minimum wage. So he has to fight on the legality with the banks on how he's going to, you know, take that money from the bank, considering that they closed the financial year for last year.
All right, Kelvin, let's also juxtapose this with the interest rate, because I'm happy you mentioned the private sector. They are not having the best time of their life. We've seen divestments, we've seen closing of shops, we've seen businesses close down because interest rates keeps going higher. Although this is not as brutal as the previous one, 50 basis point, but it's still higher. It's still quite high at the end of the day, because when the markups are done and the margins are done, it's way even higher than what the central bank is putting out at the end of the day. So Is this a situation of like taking from Peter to pay Paul at the end of the day? Because if some companies can't cope, they may have to either be aggressive in their productivity demand or may have to downsize. What do you see?
Well, the companies I pity the most are companies that already have existing loans and they have pendency on those existing loans, and they didn't provide like a premium to lock in the interest rates when they were borrowing, when they took those loans. And the fact that there's been like a tightening, monetary policy tightening to align the yield curve differential of the inflation to interest yield curve. And you could see that the last one took it to about 26.75%. Has made life very difficult in terms of the net interest expense on the balance sheet of these companies. It's not a very good time, but let us also understand that the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Monetary Policy Committee, does not have a choice but to raise interest rates to match up with, there's always a yield curve. And the reason is because if you say, oh, the central bank should not raise rates, yeah, what happens typically is there's going to be a capital flight from Naira to US dollar denominated assets. You're going to see the Naira continue to slide against the US dollar. And the impact of the inflation that comes from extreme rate exposure is going to further increase the inflation, and you're just going to keep that vicious cycle continue. So you have a situation, for example, where money supply, M1 and M3 money supply is nearly 100 trillion Naira. You also have a situation where demand is higher than supply. There's cost push and demand push inflationary pressures on the inflation, headline inflation and food inflation rate. Food constitutes about 51% of the CPI basket. Energy constitutes about 17% of the CPI basket. And energy has a direct consequence on the price of food because of the cost of transporting foods across Nigeria. And the fact that you don't have horizontal and proper vertical railway infrastructure to move cargoes that is cheaper than road transportation that consumes a lot of diesel, So we need to understand that, number one, there is no magic wand to solve this problem.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's a problem that is going to take a while to solve. There's no magic wand. And number two, the MPC has to always maintain a yield curve differential. Before, it used to be 400 basis points or 4%. Now it's widened. They always have to maintain a yield curve differential, because if they don't, you're going to see capital flight. And as that capital flies, the Naira is going to continue to slide against the US dollar.
So at the end of the day, for some of us who are just looking, the conversation is how productive can we be? Because our biggest cash cow, what we call our camera one, which must be on and at best capacity, at premium functionality, which is the oil, we're not doing well as well. 1.2 million barrels per day. That is in itself, as against our 1.7 or so target we're looking at. So, but let's move on from that, because there are a couple of issues I want you to address. And the next one has to do with this debacle between Dangote Refinery and Aliko Dangote and the regulators in the NNDPR and all of the things that are played out. There's so much noise around it. So maybe you help us, because when there is that much noise, we can miss the truth and misplace the fact at the end of the day. I've never seen Aliko Dangote talk this much to the media. In all the times I've met him, I've seen it, I've known Dangote. I've never seen him talk like this. And all this, what Nigerians will call goes between him and the regulator. But let me take you, let me start with some of the things that have been said by some persons, including his friend. Let me start with Femi Otedola. This is what Femi Otedola said, that in reacting to what's been going on, supporting local champions like Dangote is crucial for our national development and economic independence. Let us continue to foster and support these visionaries who drive our nation's progress. That's what Femi Otedola said. That's the first slide. Yes, this one. So let's go to what Alhaji Atiku Abubakar said. He said the conflict between Aliko Dangote and NNDPR official is troubling. The Dangote Refinery, our nation's largest private investment, is crucial for Nigeria's energy and economic stability. So you can see a lot of people are weighing in. Maybe you can help us unpack some of this noise and shouts, if you allow me to put it that way, because a lot of people may not really understand what is going on.
Well, to be honest with you, I know, like I said, I'm very disappointed with the remarks from the regulator, from Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Agency, the former DPR, because the regulator is supposed to protect the businesses and foster factors that will enable the growth of these businesses. So, you know, the last oil and gas week, the current chairman of the IPPG, Independent Petroleum Producers Group, you know, mentioned that, listen, Nigeria has to move away from this exporting of raw crude oil, because the crude oil you export are bought by refineries, you know, to refine into petroleum products and then sent and sold, either distributed locally or sent to other countries as exports. You know, move to a situation where it can maintain that crude oil feedstock, refine, create derivatives, and export for greater value. You know, so the current debacle that says that, you know, Aliko Dangote wants a monopoly because he wants us to stop import, it's very unfortunate, because the idea is to stop importation. And not like the importation are products of high quality. In fact, as a matter of fact, I was speaking with my friend last night, and he was telling me that he had to spend 19 million naira to repair his wife's GLE, Mercedes-Benz GLE, that got bad because the impurities and residues from driving the car blocked a particular piston ring, and the engine got damaged, and he had to change the engine entirely, you know. So this is the impact of importing petrol that has very high sulfur content and very low octane level. Anything below 60% octane and anything above 50% sulfur, it's not very good for car engines, especially high-performing car engines, you know. And you could see that a test that was done at the lab of the Dangote Refinery last week shows that as at last weekend, the sulfur level of the diesel that comes from the refinery was 87.6 parts per million, you know, and the sulfur level of diesel that was coming from a diesel that was taken from a Total downstream energies, downstream operations filling station came out at about 1,829 ppm. For metrics, it came to about 2,631 ppm, which is very high. The ECOWAS framework standard maximum is about 200 parts per million for sulfur level. And, you know, just this Monday, the test that was done again shows that that ppm for Dangote has dropped from 87.6 to 32 ppm, and its target is 10 ppm. So this is the first time in the history of Nigeria that we're going to have products that comes anywhere close to globally accepted standards, and that can actually be used in the US, in Canada, in the European Union, that aligns with the American Society for Testing and Materials, which is the most globally recognized method for testing gasoline products all over the world. The European Union has its own testing method called the EN228, you know, and there are about 5 different testing methods globally. Okay. So the fact that the regulator is sacrificing the quality of the products that comes into Nigeria because he's afraid that monopoly is not good for the economy says a lot about the government's strategy to ensure that there's backward integration and that the engines of the cars that use these products are protected and maintained.
Mr. Emmanuel, there's a lot to talk about with this Dangote thing because there are variations. On one hand, Dangote is making accusation against them. They're making accusation against him. We even hear things, oh, he's pre-commissioned, quality of diesel and all of that we talked about, you just explained, giving us what the numbers look like. And even the issue of monopoly, there's a lot. And they've been at loggerheads. But we hope that the meeting with the federal government and all of them will resolve all of this issue at the end of the day so that a $20 billion investment doesn't go
Before
down.
I go quickly...
Yes, we have 30 seconds.
Before I go quickly, I was just going to say that something that needs to be done is, you know, to say, listen, for downstream distribution of the products that are refined, there's a 50-50 split between members of DAPMAN, MOMAN, and IPMAN, and direct distribution for Dangote. And Dangote is kept midstream, and he doesn't open his own fueling stations. Okay, so, all right. You know, the old talk of monopoly is doused.
I guess that's the conversation they're having now, so that everybody have a piece of the pie. Kelvin Emmanuel, economist, joining us from Abuja City. Thank you for your insights, sir.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's tell you that the federal government has announced a slash in allowances of foreign scholars who are currently stranded in Russia, Morocco, and Algeria, among others, by 12.7% due to what they cite as economic crisis. The federal government's decision to slash the scholars' allowance is contained in a memo signed by the director of Federal Scholarship Board on behalf of the Minister of Education, Professor Taha Mamman. The students are studying under the federal government bilateral educational agreement scholarship, which was established for the purpose of education exchange between Nigeria and partnering countries. The Federal Scholarship Board is supervising the scholarship under the Federal Ministry of Education. And the People's Democratic Party candidate in the September 21st governorship election in Edo State, Aswe Godalo, says he has faith in Nigeria's justice system, even as the police are yet to apprehend the perpetrators of last Thursday's shooting at the airport. Mr. Godalo said this at his campaign office in Benin City, the state capital, shortly after a meeting with delegation from the European Union. It reveals that the discussion with the EU team centered on preparations towards the Edo governorship election, which, according to him, is very much on course.
They come to look at the landscape for the sub-national election that we're having on the 21st in Edo State. So just want to ensure that things are going on well, as a free and fair environment, a transparent environment, an unbiased environment, a level playing field. So we just had a frank exchange of views. I think the police will have to investigate the process. And what we try to do is to stay on the issues and to be fair and to keep an open mind. We think that with the evidence before the police, they don't have a choice but to conduct an effective investigation, and they will do so. We don't have any reason not to believe they won't do so. All of you saw the TV footage. You saw the people that were carrying AK-47s, pump action. They know them. It's clear. It's evidence in plain sight. So, that some of those people are still walking the streets amazes me. But we have confidence, and you have to have confidence in your process until your process proves you wrong. So it's just 6-7 days. Maybe they are taking their time, but we're sure they'll get to it. Because it's evidence in plain sight. You saw the people carrying guns, and there are some things that you saw through that process from the airport down to all the places people went to that don't make sense to the right-thinking person. But we still have faith that something positive will come out of this process.
And that's it on the program. Thank you so much for your time. And of course, your usual company. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. You've been served on Lunchtime Politics.